All right, we're going to get into advanced scales. I try to keep all these concepts as simple as possible so that, as the complexities grow and as you start dealing with more complex issues, dealing with them, that you can always go back to the basic concepts and figure out where you're going with them. I learned that math was a lot the same way, and if you studied any math, you know that the addition, the subtraction, the multiplication, the division used in different ways, but most math is structured around a lot of those basic concepts. So anyway, what we're going to do first of all here is we just want to go over the major scale and its relative minor, correct? So if you have the major scale, let's say the major scale, the key of C. So you've got the major scale, it's going to be all in white notes. So if you've got it here and you're starting here in the 5th octave or in the 4th octave with a C, the relative minor, which is going to be the minor of that scale, its relative minor, is going to be 3 half steps down. 1, 2, 3 to A. A is the relative minor of that. They're the same notes, all right? You're starting with the root as a different note so that the song is structured around. It's almost looking at it as you're playing in a different mode. Does that make sense? So you're still just using all the white notes, but you're just starting and using the root as the foundation of the song would be A instead of C, but it's all the same notes. And it sounds minor because you're actually working. It sounds different in a composition sometimes. Sometimes it doesn't, but the idea of it is that it does, because you're not stepping forward from the first chord being a major. The first chord in the progression would be a minor. So that's a real simple concept, relative major and relative minor. 3 half steps down for a relative minor, 3 half steps up to the relative major, but they'd be the same notes in that key. So C, in major C, it would be all the white notes. In A minor, it would be all the white notes in that key. So that's a very simple concept. The next concept we want to talk about, I don't know that we have talked much about, is like, what scales would you want to learn? Some people won't learn hardly any scales. They'll learn the major scale and maybe the pentatonic scale, and that's it. We've talked about those as far as what notes are in them. The other ones would be the harmonic minor and the melodic minor. The first thing you have to understand, as far as I'm concerned and how I see it, when you talk to me about the harmonic minor scale and the melodic minor scale, you're talking about the same thing as if you have the C major scale here, that's all the white notes, and you go 3 half steps down to the relative minor, which would be A minor. So you're basically doing that, and they'll call them the harmonic minor scale or the melodic minor scale. So basically, the scale structure is starting from a minor position, but the same notes, if you went 3 half steps up to the major position, it's still the same scale. But I've heard some people get confused by that because they'll be, well, the scale's a minor scale. Well, it's the same concept, but most of the time people write from a minor perspective, meaning they're thinking about using it to create something more with a minor texture rather than a major texture. And it's basically that simple. The other thing, now, we'd already talked about the notes that go in that. Now, you may run into some people that will say, okay, I'm in A harmonic minor, and that's the notes that I'm going to play. Well, the structure's a little bit different. I always do this from the major point of view, so that the scale structure in a harmonic minor would be root, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and then you're going to raise the 5th, then you're going to have a 6th and a 7th and the octave. Now, the reason why that is you say why wouldn't you do it from the minor perspective? You can go ahead and just sit down and look at it, go 3 half steps down and figure out the notes in that, and you can see how it goes. And basically, the whole idea is you've just raised the 5th on that. And on the melodic minor, it's the same thing as the C scale, except for you raise the 4th and you raise the 5th. Other than that, all the notes are the same. Now, why I show a lot of people when we're talking about advanced theory is that anymore I don't. I'll work with the pentatonic scale, I'll work with the major scale, I'll work with the harmonic scale, and I'll work with the melodic scale. I'll work with those 4 scales to get things progressing along and working. Most of the time, though, I mean, I'll go to them and go to their relative minors, their relative majors, and things like that to look at things that are happening. By the way, the pentatonic scale, it basically the same thing. If you go, you've got C, you're starting to C pentatonic, and you go down to 3/2 steps to A, starting A, and then it's the minor pentatonic scale. So, but it's the same notes. So anyway, with that, and the idea is that I normally use the major scale or the minor scale to build from, to work out of, because we've talked about borrowed chords and borrowed notes, and you can go anywhere you want. The biggest issue that you're ever going to run into is making it tasteful in moving from one area to another. And if you're using chords that aren't in key or aren't in the scale, that you have to do it tastefully. And we'll talk about modulating and changing key in another video, but you know, it's a tasteful thing. Does it sound good? I mean, I was in, you know, some key, and I went to use this other chord or note that wasn't in key, and I didn't just tap on it real quick for a feeling or a coloration. The whole band is standing on that note or that chord, and it has to be a tasteful transition. That's one of the biggest things, and there's lots of theory to study in that. We'll get into some of that later, but the basic concept is what you need to understand. And I recommend those 4 scales to start with. I mean, because when you get really used to using all 4 of those scales and understand the relative minors, relative majors, and the different textures you get, because, you know, when you're looking at the major scale and you're looking at major C scale, that, you know, you got all the white notes. So, you know, the basic chords that you use from that, and we talked about chords, and we're going to talk about chords more in the next video, I think, in the next one, is that you've got the root, the second, the third, the fourth, the fifth, the sixth, and the seventh in that scale, and then back to the root at the octave, an octave up or octave down. So you start out with the root. The most basic chordal structure is going to start with from that root, major chord, which is going to be root, third, fifth. The second interval is going to be a minor chord, and it's going to go root, flat third, fifth. The third interval from the root of C is going to be a minor chord, root, flat third, fifth. The fourth is going to be major if you follow the train of thought using just the white keys, root, third, and fifth. From the fifth and G, it's going to be root, third, and fifth, the major chord. From the sixth, it's going to be a minor chord, root, flat third, and fifth. And from the seventh, it's a half diminished. And a half diminished, I don't look at it as a triad, and there's different ways to view it, but the easiest way that I look at a half diminished is it's root, flat fifth, or sharp fourth, augmented fourth or diminished fifth, a flat seventh, and a flat third. And then you have basically the half diminished chord so that it'll play in key. Does that make sense? So it's only using the root notes. So that's normally that. Now, anytime you use any other scale, that's going to be different. Like if you've got the harmonic minor, which is going to be root, second, third, fourth, augmented fifth, sixth, and seventh, and that's the harmonic scale, the major harmonic scale. Whereas we talked about how a lot of people look at those scales as minor harmonic or minor melodic scales. But I don't look at them that way because I like to be able to relate them directly to the major scale. Does that make sense? It's easier to remember it that way. So you have to understand that those chords are going to be different. You've got a different, this note you're not going to be able to use playing in key. This note you will be. So there'll be different chords in the first note, the second note, building chords off that, the building chords from the third note, or from the third intervals, from the fourth intervals. The chords are going to be different. Does that make sense? The chords that you can build from them. So that's a huge concept to get in your head so that when you're talking to somebody and they've got some new scale that they've come up from, from one too many peyote buds, and, just joking, but, so, it's like they've got some scale and it's a 6-note scale where they've got root, second interval, third interval, and then they've augmented the fifth, and then they're using the seventh, and there's 5, all right, or you could say with the fourth. And there's 6 notes in that scale that they've decided to create the scale with that they're playing around. Well, that's fine. Then the key is going to basically be based around that scale, so that you can only use those notes and chords that only use those notes while you're building a progression. And it's that simple. So whenever you're talking about advanced theory as far as scales, the simple concept. That's the simple concept. And, the more I talk about people and the longer that I studied it, I went back to basics more and more and more until I basically got to the point to where I'll go to the major scale and I'll go to the minor scale. And sometimes I'll go to the pentatonic for some things and the relative minor of the pentatonic. And I'll build from that because I'll start out with an idea that's happening. I'll get it in my head or something. And, and I'll just kind of roll with it. And I might use borrowed chords or borrowed notes. And I'm always trying to either get back into that key and that scale, or I'm trying to move somewhere else into some other kind of progression or other key or other scale. And so it basically, I try to keep it that simple in my mind. And then as I'm progressing with my composition, that I try to figure, where am I going? Where am I going to? Am I trying to go to this other scale? Am I just borrowing a couple chords or a couple notes? I mean, where am I going with this? And that makes it a lot simpler to deal with. Deconstructing other people's music and what scales they're going with and what's happening with their modulations and borrowed notes and chords can be much more difficult, because it's very difficult to understand what Bach or Beethoven was doing, or even nowadays some pop music. What did he have in his mind? Did all of a sudden he think, I heard this weird Hungarian or this very unique Hungarian scale and played on the sitar, and some, very unique instrument, wind instrument, and it sounded really cool. And they did this real basic thing, and, it was this kind of a drone effect, and I want to put it in my song or something similar to it to accent what I'm doing here. And then I want to come back out of it. So you trying to understand the exact train of thought they did working within that scale and key. That can be very difficult if you're not just sitting there, because he could have been going anywhere. I mean, any combination of those notes, some kind of scale, or what he heard on the Indian radio station, or Azerbaijan, you don't know, what the heck he's been exposed to, or what he could have been thinking. So the understanding of that is it's better to try to deconstruct it and see where they're going from those perspectives, unless the scale sounds very strange and you're like, well, to me that sounds strange, it's very unique and it's got this other kind of tonality to it. And then you just sit down trying to figure out where he's going, and that can be a project in itself. Just trying to figure out what was their train of thought as far as the scale and the key, and where did they start from, and they were going all over the place. And when we get into really advanced theory as far as experimental music and really advanced string or otherworldly jazz, I should say, some things it can be very difficult to understand where they're going. They've changed key 12 times. They've put all kinds of borrowed chords and notes in there that, trying to deconstruct it and figure out where his head was at, where he was going, can be very difficult. And a lot of times you're just going to fall back on what the heck notes is he using and what chords is he using. And I don't want to spend the next 6 months trying to deconstruct this song to that level. Does that make sense? So just kind of be careful of that and keep that in mind. So, when we're talking about scales, you can build any scale from any of the notes. You can use all 12 of them. And that's a scale. It is. That you can use all 12 of the notes. A chromatic scale, it is the chromatic scale. And you can use any of those notes. It's not used very often or written very often that way, but it is a scale. Or if you use 3 notes, or you use 4 notes in the scale, and you just build, harmonies from that. That can be another thing you will hear sometimes, that somebody will use a scale that doesn't have very many notes in it, even a pentatonic scale. And instead of building full chords off of that, when they're writing rhythm parts to it because they're trying to stay within key or in that scale, for the song that they'll use like two-part harmonies for the progression of for the chordal progression. Does that make sense? Because like if you're playing a major scale and you decide to go, major C, if you're playing C major, you go C major, E minor, up to G major. If you were doing that and you're playing pentatonic, those chords have three notes, they're triads. Well, if you can't build a decent chord out of the notes that you have to work with, sometimes you can build a decent sound out of a harmony, two notes for that next chord that should be coming in the progression instead of a three-note triad or a much more complex chord that sometimes you can use harmonies as you're building. And I have done that a lot. Even when I'm working on a C major or pentatonic or relative minor, sometimes I'll go and just use a harmony because I don't want all that other sound going on. Does that make sense? I can get a really good full sound with different textures from different instruments and stuff, but it'll be only a two-part harmony, two-note harmony. It'd be maybe C and the fourth, rather than using a full sus, which would be like C, fourth, fifth, a sustained chord that, more than likely is going to resolve back to a root third, fifth, that I'll just use the root in the fourth for a certain texture. And that's fine. You're in key. So the simple concepts that I'm trying to state here will help you later whenever you're looking at some scale and you're trying to understand that. The biggest hurdle you're probably going to run into on the piano, on the guitar, it might not be so bad if you really know it. And on the piano, it won't be so bad if you really know the piano also, is that playing it in a different key. Playing the song in a different key, then you got to figure out what notes are sharp or flat or where the notes are that you're using in that scale. And that can be a hurdle. And some of the biggest hurdles I've seen and that I had when I was learning the melodic scale, the major melodic, the minor melodic, and, the harmonic minor scale, was the chords that go with them. What chords, in the major scale, I figured out 58 chords, that chordal structures that I thought sounded cool, you playing in key, besides the basics that we would talk about again. 58 of them. I don't use them all the time, but 58 of them. So you're learning them all again for the melodic scale or which ones will work, where you can play them, at what interval they'll fit, that you're staying in key. Because if I can't play the major, I can't play an E major in the key of C. It's a minor chord, root, flat, third, and fifth. If I play an E major, if I play an E major, it's going to be root, third, and fifth, right? So, but it has to be a minor chord or it's not in key. So that's just a simple example. It can get more complex the more complex the scale is. But that's the biggest hurdle I've seen people go through, trying to learn all the chords that can be played in that. Figuring out the basic chords for the basic roots, trying to make them major or minor, and then sometimes that's not possible. Sometimes the closest you get is some trippy kind of sounding chord, for the third interval, and you'll be going, well, this scale is kind of trippy and cool, but for the third interval, it just don't work. So you start trying to go, okay, well, what kind of a harmony can I do from that third interval on this scale I'm working with? So that can be very complicated and can get more and more complex the more you study it. The more you study the scale, the more you study the chords that can go with it and things like that before you even think about changing key, borrowing chords, and modulations and things like that. So try to keep it real simple in your head about that. And like I said, if you learn those four scales, it will really help you see, because it became full circle for me. I studied all kinds of different scales all over the place, and I went full circle. I ended up coming back to the major scale, the minor scale, and the pentatonic scale. I really love the harmonic scale. I love the harmonic scale. I really do. I'll use that now and then. But it's very, how do you say it? It's not something I just pull out of my hat and use all the time. It's got a texture and a feel all to itself. And it just doesn't fit everywhere, it just doesn't. And so using it, for full production, unless it's really based on that scale, can be difficult. So, can be difficult. So that's the basics of advanced scales, is that, you understanding what scales, what notes you're going to use, and then, the chords that you can play using those notes and staying in key. And try not to get any more complicated than that. There's much more complicated things that can happen in music theory later on. That's a basic foundation, a basic concept to build from and to use to create larger complexities. So that's about as far as I want to go for now. That simple concept that you can understand. And, we had already talked about the harmonic scale, the melodic scale, the major scale, and the pentatonic scale. Those being the 4 scales that I would suggest you stick around a lot. They each have a very unique flavor and taste that really doesn't get you going too far out and doesn't give you too much to get you so far away from the chromatic scale of being able to come full circle and come back to that chromatic scale and start with a root note and figure out what sounds cool. Where do I want to go with this? What chord is going to come next? I'll start with some basic theory, staying in key. Well, that ain't working. I'm going to try to borrow a chord, or I'm going to modulate, and da-da-da-da-da. But the basic concept of those scales, it's very simple. So that when you're talking about complex scales and things like that you don't get lost in a whole bunch of other things that they're attaching to that very basic concept, that they're building upon those basic concepts and making them more complex. So I hope that made that very clear. And I really didn't want to spend a lot of time going through this and addressing, a whole bunch of other scales and the Hungarian minor and, on and on and on and on and on, Japanese scales, all kinds of different scales that, those scales, you find out what the scale is, and then you figure out what's going on with the key of it and what notes, what chords can be played in it. And it's that simple. The complexities that you build from that concept are advanced music theory. But you can watch videos on people, you can hear music, you can experiment yourself, and that's when you start doing that, you're dealing with advanced scales and advanced scale theory. And it's very simple. It sounds like a big old word, but it really isn't, and try to keep it that simple in your head so that you've got those 4 scales we talked about to work from, and them inside and out in all kinds of different keys in any key, and the chords that can go with them, and things like that. And, you're well on your way to a lot of advanced scale theory right there. Because when you make changes in that, or you decide you want to go somewhere else with it, that the concept that I learned is that, you'll hear somebody say, well, I really want to mess with this other scale. Why? Unless it's got some sound. I found a lot of times that's kind of cool. You're really messing around with this scale. But I found, I'd be sitting there watching somebody and I go, well, it's because of things that were done in that culture. So the first thing would be the instruments they were using was an attraction more than the scale was. And timbres, harmonies with different, if you listen to like Western classical music, that you'll got a cello, a violoncello, a violin, a contrabass, and even just those simple instruments, stringed instruments, the textures that they give in working together in the major scale is a flavor and a palette. And if you're working with different instruments in different countries, you've got a whole bunch of different, textures to work with when you're composing. Does that make sense? And because they've used some other scale, sometimes isn't as attractive to the individual that's seeking that out and studying the advanced theory of that scale and studying that scale as much as it is the textures. So, and keep it in mind, try to keep it very simple like that and understand that concept. So when you start messing around with some Chinese scale or something, that you understand that probably a lot of the traction is the simplicity. It could be the complexity, but a lot of it's the textures of the instruments and the combination of instruments leading you towards that scale. And, the concept isn't that difficult. That scale might be, it might be root second, third, fifth, or root second, third, fifth, so that might be it, and drop the sixth, and it's this Chinese scale that they use a lot, to do these things. And the simple concept is you're understanding some advanced theory because now you understand a different scale. And now the work you have to do to understand the chords that go with it and staying in key playing, that can help you to understand what's going on in the composition also. But a lot of times it's just the textures, because I found myself, I'd be like, well, that's cool. And then I realized, and a lot of that stuff I get into, well, it wasn't the scale that was attracting me, like the advanced theory of some other scale and studying it and the chords and go with it and all that stuff. It was the different textures of the different instruments, the different beats of the music, all that kind of stuff going on. There was more of attraction than the notes and chords that were being played. You know, sometimes there'd be a scale or a change, in the music, going to some different chord or a series of chords working through a movement. And then I'd be like, what scale is that? And what chords are those? Because that in combination with the different textures of an instrument, it made it sound like a whole nother world, like it was a whole nother world to explore, which it was, that whole learning experience was digging around in a whole new world. It was cool, so I don't dissuade you from that. Just don't get lost in it, keep the concepts real simple that we've talked about here. And you understand advanced scales. And we'll talk more about this later when we get more advanced. But, and when you're talking about advanced scales, the first advanced scales that I would point you towards are the melodic scale and the melodic minor and the harmonic minor scale, and their relative majors, and mess around with them and the chords that played with them, playing in key, and just doing that will open up a lot of worlds for you. I mean, different textures and sounds and harmonies. So I hope that kind of made that easy to understand, so that, when someone talks to you about another different scale or something, that you understand the simple concept that's happening there. And you understand, what you're going to have to deal with working with this other scale or changing a scale. Like the melodic minor, or the melodic scale is you've augmented the fourth, gone from the fourth to an augmented fourth with, a sharp fourth, and augmenting the fifth to the sharp fifth, and it's that simple. That's what you've done. And the complexities become in using that as a scale and staying in key, using chords that will work inside that scale, and only using those notes in the scale, and then figuring out what you want to use as far as borrowed notes or borrowed chords in there, or how to modulate from some cool things you got going on in there, changing to a different key and different movements using those. So I hope that made that very simple, so that when someone's talking to you about advanced scales, that you've got 12 chromatic notes, and it's a series of notes that become a key for you to work within, just like the key of C, that you only have the white notes being played here. It's that simple. And I think that you understand that well enough. If you understand that concept, that anytime you get thrown anything that's different, that it's going to be very easy for you to evaluate that, instead of looking at it like it's Greek, you'd be like, what happened there? Well, the guy has augmented the fifth and he's augmented the second from a major scale to create that scale. But there's still 7 tones in it, and you've just deconstructed what's happening, or you understand that when you're looking at a scale. Does that make sense? And when you get, also as a last note, when you get into advanced scales and things like that, when you're looking at a piece of music, that can be kind of difficult sometimes, because you're looking at a piece of music and you're going, well, what is that? It's like, what is that written in? And more times than not, if it's a very unique scale or something not used normally a lot, there'll be notes about it to help you understand what's going on there, what was their train of thought. Because most compositions in Western music, you might be dealing with some pentatonics, major, relative minors, maybe some melodic minors and some harmonic minors, and anything beyond that, there's more than likely going to be notes on it. If there isn't, then you're dealing with somebody who's, when we get into really advanced stuff, experimental music and super advanced jazz, things like that we'll talk a little bit more in depth in that. But I wouldn't worry about that right at this moment. If you're progressing along through these videos, you've got a lot to study right now as far as scales. Those 4 scales, understanding them inside and out in any key, and, the chords that go with them, that are being played in key from different intervals. And that's a huge lesson that you're going to have to work on. You can find stuff about that on the internet, to, work out the details of what chords are going to be played there. Does that make sense? The basic chords for for the intervals from the root and the intervals involved in that scale, and and possible larger complexities that can be built from that. Does that make sense? Because it's just like, here's the C major and the C major scale. You've got the root, third, fifth. Well, the sixth is just going to be added sixth, correct? And the seventh is going to be the dominant seventh is going to be added. It's going to add a flat seventh to that, and if it's like a minor seventh or a major seventh, it's going to be root, third, fifth, and seventh, and added to those three, and that's a major seventh. That's basic building on that, and those are the things you're going to have to worry about as you're studying those scales. So I hope you enjoyed that, and I hope when somebody says advanced scale theory to you, that you try to keep it, for now, that basic in your head, and you'll find that'll get you a long ways. And if you get into really complex stuff, that will progress along as we go through all these videos and on this channel, into some fairly advanced things. But for now, that should keep you chewing and keep your mouth full. Peace, hope, love. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you in the next one. Out chords.